Hello everyone, it's Fred again from Notes of a Nomad, video number 59, I believe. I've spoken about the times I worked on the gold mines in South Africa, but I haven't really mentioned that when I left the gold mines in 1979, I went and worked in the computer industry. I worked for an American company called Control Data Corporation. And I found a few pictures. They're not very good quality, but this was sort of what the computer room looked like. It took most of the top floor of an office building. It was full of tape drives and big computer disk drives. There was the size of washing machines with big, large disks in it that didn't hold a lot of megabytes or a lot of disk information. In fact, I remember I was putting information into the computer and I was using 1 megabyte, and the computer manager, because they had managers and operators of all the computers, came to me and said, "You're using a lot of data space. You're using 1 megabyte." That sounds quite funny in today's world of gigabytes and terabytes and even what, I don't know, even other bytes now. It's just crazy. Um, that large computer, I think this phone is probably 1,000 times more powerful than that multi-million-dollar computer that I worked on. Well, I sold services on. It was a service bureau. People couldn't afford to buy mainframe computers. There was no PCs, and they wanted to use a computer. They would rent space, and I worked for the company Control Data, and they had a service called Cybernet Services. We were a computer bureau. You could walk in and rent time on our computer, which once again wasn't even thousands as powerful as that as most phones today. I've got a couple other pictures that might explain if my grandchildren, everyone said my granddad worked on a computer company called Control Data Corporation. The computer company's gone now. It was part of what they called the bunch. There was IBM, which is still around, and then they had the other computer called the bunch, and that was Burroughs, and then U stood for B for Burroughs, U for UNIVAC, N for NCR, C for Control Data, and H for Honeywell. Those were some of the other computer companies that were around in those days. This was what one of the tape drives looked like, and you can see it says Control Data. So this was the sort of equipment that was in the office that I worked in. What else do we have here? We've got another picture of one of the sort of, I guess, the mainframe computers that was a Control Data 7600, I think it was. And when you look at it, it was full of wires and it was very complicated to make. And again, probably one of the computer chips that you have in your phone is so much more powerful than those multi-million-dollar computer systems. And this was a interesting aspect of Control Data. They had a company which was called Plato, and Plato was for education. And this was a Plato terminal, which was touch screen. You could answer the questions. There would be quizzes. And this Plato stood for Programmed Logic for Automatic Training Operations, Plato. Programmed Logic for Automatic Teaching operations. And they tried to make money and sell this, but it was so expensive compared to teaching. But Plato was around for many years. It was revolutionary in those days to have a touch screen and answer questions like multiple choice. I remember using Plato a little bit. I had some training programs, but if you'd ever look up Plato on Wikipedia, you'll see quite interesting how they thought they could make money out of it. The company was based in Minneapolis, or actually near Minneapolis. It was called St. Paul, Minnesota. That was the head office of Control Data Corporation. Very interesting company. It had supercomputers in those days. They had a fellow by the name of Seymour Cray who designed control data computers and went off and started his own organization, partly funded by Control Data, Cray Computers. And one time, Cray made the most powerful computers in the world. And one time, the Guinness Book of Records stated that a Control Data Corporation computer was the most powerful computer in the world. More powerful than anything IBM. It's a long story. It was fascinating. But Plato was revolutionary, and they had these terminals in South Africa, thought they could make money selling I guess, teaching. But again, it didn't really make money ultimately. And I think I have another interesting, what I call interesting, hopefully my grandchildren might say, these were the sort of what computers looked like when my granddad worked for the company Control Data. Let me see if I can change this. It's in the way now. It's not letting me. There we go. That was the logo of Control Data Corporation. I'll just make that a little bit bigger. So that is Control Data Corporation. My business card that I had, that was the logo on my business card. Working for Cybernet Services, part of. And the last picture I have is a very interesting terminal. This was with an acoustic coupler. You see the two cups at the top, that's where you put the telephone headset and the mouthpiece in. And that's how we would be able to communicate over a phone line with an acoustic coupler. And it was 300 bits per second. And then they brought a very fast 1200 bit per second. This was made by Texas Instrument called the Silent 700. It was a portable terminal. I could go around and put the telephone in it and then dial in, communicate with the computer from my home and some other offices from time to time. That was how we used to link. And there was no internet in those days that we could use. You had to use over a telephone line. And I used to use this Texas Instruments Silent 700 to get into the mainframe. So that was some technology that I used in 1979 till about 1982, when I left and went to work for another computer company, which I could talk about some other time. So that was my experiences working on mainframe computers. There was no PCs. I could tell you about when PCs came around in the 1980s, but early in the 80s, I was still at Control Data. We got our hands on an Apple computer, which had 64 kilobytes of memory. And I remember we took it into that computer center at Control Data, and we were showing it to some of the computer people, and the computer manager said, you know, that mainframe, the first mainframe I ever worked on didn't even have 64 kilobytes of memory. That's got more memory in that Apple computer. And this was a very old, very first model of Apple computer. In fact, it looked something like this with a little screen on top that you could get home. Anyway, it was quite, and that was the latest technology in the early 80s in South Africa. So I worked for computer companies until I left in 1985 and came to Canada. So let me stop sharing. And so that was my computer experience when I left the mining industry. And what was I doing? I was selling computer services to the mining industry, so they could come and use our mainframe computers. We had some programs, mineral evaluations where from the boreholes, it would do all of the calculations. We even had, oh my gosh, screens, not just alphanumeric. Most screens were only alphanumeric, no pictures, but we did have graphic screens, which cost a fortune, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, just a screen where you could have pictures drawn on by the computer. Oh, technology was so old-fashioned compared to what's available now. It's amazing. And we can get them for a few $100s. That was millions of dollars of equipment in South Africa. So what's going on? What else? Oh, I've got excitement in next Friday, which is Good Friday. I am scheduled to get my first jab for the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's looking up. Ultimately, you'll be able to travel. I don't know when that's going to happen, but the, at least I'm going to get my in a week and a half's time. I'll get my first injection. So that's the good news on Good Friday. So it's going to be a Good Friday next week for me too. I'll be getting that vaccine. So that's enough for today. I'll say au revoir, adios. Wish you, your family, and friends lots of love and laughter. Bye for now from Fred and Notes of a Nomad.